Hey, this is Dr. Kenneth Monaghan, author of Lights, Mirrors, Action, a guide to transforming the lives of caregivers and stroke survivors. And if you really want to learn how to level up your life, you should be listening to the Time to Shine Today podcast with my good friend here, Scott Ferguson. So let's level up.
Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. This is Scott Ferguson, and I'm super excited to bring you my good friend all the way from Ireland, Dr. Kenneth Monaghan. Dr. Ken is very, very passionate in helping stroke survivors, and also what's even makes him stand out even more than other people that are passionate about that field is he's passionate about the caregivers that help the survivors get along to really what we call here Time to Shine Today, stack those dubs, those wins, knowing that it's inch by inch, it's a cinch by the yard. It's hard doing the small things to really get their motor skills back, getting them back to a seriously good quality of life. So if you're dealing with anybody that, if you've had a stroke or know somebody, a loved one or a friend that is dealing with surviving a stroke right now, this is a great episode to share with them. Or if you just like to hit the like or subscribe button, that really helps with my sponsors and affiliates. So without further ado, here comes my really good friend, Dr. Kenneth Monaghan. Let's level up. Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. This is Scott Ferguson, and I graciously reached all the way across the pond to Ireland to book my guy, Dr. Kenneth Monaghan. He's a renowned expert in stroke rehabilitation, is revolutionizing at-home recovery for stroke survivors. With over 32 years of experience, he leads cutting-edge research, develops innovative solutions, and empowers patients to optimize their home environment for physical rehabilitation. Kenneth's groundbreaking work, featured in media and recognized with patents, reflects his mission to provide the best possible care and support for stroke survivors and caregivers. So when you're done, or if you want to look in the show notes, don't go there now, but you can go to www.lightsmirrorsaction.com to learn a bit more. But if you don't listen to the end, you're going to miss out on a chance to get a free copy of his book, Lights, Mirrors, Actions, a guide to transforming the lives of caregivers and stroke survivors. So listen to the end. And Dr. Ken, thank you so much for coming on. Please introduce yourself to the Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. But first, what's your favorite color and why?
I like green. I suppose
Green.
it's kind of Irish, really, isn't it?
But what, after a stroke, which you and I were talking off mic, there's kind of a rebirth after strokes. I'm saying you have to learn a lot of stuff. The mentality you have to, the caregivers have to have the right mentality with you. And it's kind of green is like a rebirth, right? And spring
Yeah,
comes, green.
yeah,
But
you're
I
right. You're
understand
right.
your Irish roots with like the green as well, brother. But listen, man, 32 years is kind of baller, man. That is awesome. You're very well respected. A lot of people have said you got to get this guy on. So tell me a little bit about the roots of things here, Dr. Ken.
Well, look at it. I've kind of had two careers, Scott. I've the first 16 years of my life as a physiotherapist or a physical therapist was very much into sports medicine, so
Ooh,
musculoskeletal injuries, and I would have specialized in all of that area and worked with sports teams, professional teams in Ireland. And I was telling you earlier on, I actually worked in Florida for 4 years as a physical therapist, and that was a really great experience. I got some great orthopedic experience at that time. And about 16 years ago, so around the time that I met my wife and I moved back from Dublin, so I'd started lecturing in University College Dublin, and I thought I'd be there for the rest of my life.
okay.
And I met my wife at one of these. There was a famous singer in Ireland. He's called Joe Dolan, and at his one of his party nights, I met my wife. Changed the whole direction that I was going. So I moved to Northwest Ireland, and I had also become very interested in neurology at that time, and I had been very interested in unusual therapies, so innovative therapies. And one of those, the title of my book comes from, which is mirror therapy, and we might discuss it later. And when I came down and I got myself a job in a local university, I started to develop a research group there, and we called that the Neuroplasticity Research Group. So
Mm.
I had read a book by a man called Norman Doidge, Scott, and any of your listeners that are interested in absolutely really, really interesting stories about different neurology problems and very innovative treatments, they should find Norman's two books. His first book
Okay.
is called The Brain That Changes Itself, and the second one is The Brain's Way of Healing. And when I got that first book, I have to say it was like this epiphany. It was like this. it really changed my life, because a lot of the therapies that were in there that they were using, we subsequently then brought them into our research group. So I've raised about 2 million euros or dollars really
Wow.
for projects, and I have about 10 researchers that have gone through my books, and all of the therapies that we worked on were therapies that could help neurology patients to kind of rehabilitate a little bit better, and a lot of the time remotely in their own homes type of thing.
That's
So
amazing.
I became hugely interested in that area, and I have to say it's very rewarding. So
Neuroplasticity, does that kind of go in line with what you had just said with kind of the rehabilitation?
yeah, so neuroplasticity means that your brain has the ability to change its shape and its function at any moment in time. So your brain is changing just by listening to me now. My brain is the same; it's going to change. But of course, what a lot of people, when I qualified as a physiotherapist 30 years ago, we were told at that time that if you got a stroke, that really within 6 months you were going to get the best recovery at that stage, and if you hadn't got a recovery, then you're in trouble.
Mm,
Whereas we know now that your brain changes all the time. So if you can keep doing repetitive exercises, motivate your brain, you can stimulate your brain in different ways, you give yourself the best chance of a rebuild and recovery. And that's been proven because we have better scanners and things nowadays to show us and prove us that. So
that's
neuroplasticity was very much from Norman Doidge's books. And we'll talk about some of the stories that were
sure.
in there, but there was some fantastic innovative things that they had found. And we ended up doing some research and kind of advancing those things a little bit as the time went on. So so now I suppose I'm fully embedded into being a thought leader in the world of stroke rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And I suppose the book really idea came from the fact that all of the therapies we had developed in our research labs, I I always felt that those things could be done very cost effectively, and people wouldn't have to spend a lot of money
Mm,
and do them in their own homes. So the mirror therapy that I might discuss at some stage,
yeah.
you can buy a $10 to $15 mirror and you can use that in your own home, and people have had fantastic recoveries for their arms and legs with that. There's a second therapy that we focus on a lot, and actually it's called cross education of strengthening, Scott. And very briefly, imagine I said to you, go to the gym for the next 6 weeks and just strengthen the right side of your body. Now, I mean,
Mm,
you'd never do that
right.
in
Right.
in reality, but
Yeah.
imagine if you did. So the right side of your body would be hugely increased in strength. But
Sure.
amazingly, if you measured the left side of your body, it can be up to 40% stronger, even though you haven't done anything. And it's because of the electricity that passes across when you're using one side of your body, there is actually neural activity, electricity that crosses to the other side. And of course, that would have huge benefits potentially for a stroke patient, because if they can't move one side of the body,
Yeah.
then they can use it.
So you're
Um,
saying to strengthen one side sometimes, while we're kind of in that recovery period, to strengthen the one side, the other side is going to benefit. If the other side's the weaker side that is affected by the stroke, it's going to benefit by the work that the
yes,
right side's doing, right?
it is, but people don't realize it because it's an electricity
100%.
kind
Yeah.
of a benefit. So
Yeah.
it's kind of giving the person activation that's there. And you see, the mirror therapy, I don't know, are you familiar with mirror therapy, Scott? Did you ever hear of that?
After watching your videos on YouTube, I am, but I'll let you talk, buddy. Which, by the way,
uh,
I'm gonna put a link to I think it's the evening routine that you have
right.
in there, brother. I think it's like 12 minutes long or some jazz like that. And I've watched it twice. And I actually
Oh,
sent it to a couple people to
very
watch it.
good.
I'm like, listen what he says about the lighting and the mirror and stuff like that. It just made sense. But anyways, go ahead, brother.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, it's just that your listeners will be wondering what's mirror therapy. So very, very briefly, if you, again, Scott, we're going to use an example. Let's say that you got a stroke and your left hand and your left fingers can't work. So if you put your hands up on your desk in front of you and we place a mirror, we put a mirror vertical but sideways, so that the
Okay.
reflective side of the mirror is actually facing your good hand, which would be your right hand.
Understood.
And then the non-reflective part of the mirror would be facing your hand that can't move.
Understood.
And and then if you turn your head and you look into the reflective part of the mirror, you're going to now see
Your
what
left,
looks like your left
left
hand,
hand.
right?
Wow.
Yeah, yes.
That's awesome, dude. Yeah.
And when you move that right hand and
Yeah.
you focus on the left hand,
Sure.
after a few, very, very quickly, your brain will think that that's your left hand. And of course, what's happening is when you're focusing on that left hand, the visual feedback that you're getting, that's actually
Wow.
desensitizing your brain, it's creating new pathways, and it's helping your
Oh,
neuroplasticity. Now, look at these things don't work perfectly for everybody, of course,
yeah.
but for most people, they work a certain amount. And this is another key thing that your listeners need to realize is that if you have a stroke in the morning time, you're going to be looking for this golden therapy that's going to get you better. Isn't that right? We're all
Sure.
looking for that one therapy.
100%. Right.
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to say to you now, there is no such thing. There is no such thing as a golden therapy, but there are about 30 different therapies, which include the things I've just talked about, that are safe to use and have evidence that they work. And you
Mm.
see, this is what we need to encourage stroke patients and patients in general to do, is to become much more active in the decision making of their recovery. So this is probably the way medicine is actually going to go over the next 20 years, is
Feedback.
that yeah, you're going to see people being actively involved in deciding
Yeah.
what works best for them.
Active
Because I mean,
feedback, not just bodily feedback, like
yeah,
mental
absolutely.
feedback. So,
Because
along
a
with
lot,
that, Doc, there's got to be a belief system that has got to correlate between the stroke survivor, their caregiver, right? And during this healing process and rehabilitation process, let's open up that can, because you and I talked about it very, very briefly off mic. But what do the
yes.
people that are involved have
So look at
to?
well, look at your. To me, this is the key thing that really every stroke survivor and caregiver has to become aware of, is that everybody everybody focuses on the therapies that they need to do at home, whereas you're right, you're correct. Actually, the starting point is you have to change things in your stroke survivor, and the first thing is you have to change their beliefs, because from what I've heard over the last 30 years, I don't know if this is your experience, but when patients are getting ready to go home, so say they're 2 weeks away from going home, unfortunately, at a time where they should be looking forward to that, it's the exact opposite. It's like there's a black cloud over their heads, because they're thinking, number one, they're thinking that they're not going to recover any further when they're at home after a certain amount of time. And this is, of course, is rubbish, because they've proven now, we spoke about this, neuroplasticity takes place at all times, at any time, and that can be utilized. Second thing that your stroke survivor is going to believe, and this is the false belief, is that their home is not a good place for them to carry out rehabilitation. And of course, again, this is complete nonsense, because your home, because of the sights, the sounds, the smells, everything that's contained in it, and the familiarity with it. There's a researcher in Trinity College in Dublin. He's called Ian Robertson. He's a fantastic guy, and he's written a brilliant book that I think you'd love. It's called The Winner Effect. And in that book, he tells us that when somebody's in their home environment, Scott, they create extra testosterone in their bodies, and that's that rebuild hormone. So you don't realize it, but when you're at home, and this is just one of the benefits, you're creating this extra testosterone that really gives you a better chance of creating neuroplasticity and a rebuild. So that's just one of the things. So your home is a fantastic place, and also your home allows you to have the flexibility, and you kind of have a better self-efficacy, that belief that you can do things
Sure.
when you're in your own home.
Right.
And then the third thing is, and then this is the existing belief in a stroke patient normally, is that their wife or their husband or their caregiver or their family member, because they're not a physiotherapist or they're not an occupational therapist, they'll think they're not a good person to be in charge or to supervise or to help them and assist them. And again, this is absolutely completely untrue, because you as a caregiver, so if your family member had a stroke in the morning time, because you are trustworthy, because you are actually able to explain things in a very easy to understand way, because you are able to have mentioned these self-belief based statements, which is
There's
something
trust
that
there
has,
too.
yes, this trust, and because you're able to supervise and all of those things, you actually have natural talents that are very underestimated, that people wouldn't think of. So the starting point is, if I have had a stroke in the morning time and I believe those things, and I'd love to tell you a quick story just before I mention this next thing, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And it's called the milkshake story. Did you ever hear this, Scott?
No, let's hear it.
So so there's a brilliant psychologist in Stanford University, Alia Crum, and she did this brilliant experiment with students, and it was called the Milkshake Experiment. And what she did was, she gave a group of students a specially designed milkshake, and she told them that it was so high in calories that they probably wouldn't need another meal for the rest of the day. And then couple of days later, she took the same group of students. She gave them a specially made milkshake, and she told them this time that it was so low in calories, they probably need 2 or 3 meals for the rest of the day.
Mm.
And of course, as you can imagine, it was the same milkshake.
Right.
But what they were measuring in the students was they were measuring this hunger hormone that's called ghrelin, and they were looking to see how much of it was produced for the rest of the day. And of course, what they found is extraordinary. The students who believed and are taught that they actually were having a high calorie milkshake, they only produced 1/3 of the amount of hunger hormone as the students who thought that they were having a low calorie one. And that's extraordinary for this reason, that the only real explanation of that is that their brains created something physiologically in their bodies based on what they thought. Isn't that right?
100%.
So when that now, we know that that's true, then now you realize how important it is for any person, not just a stroke person, to have a very positive mindset or a positive belief system before
Thank
you
you.
set out on a journey. Isn't that right?
Yes. 100%.
And the opposite is true. So if you have a negative mindset, a negative belief system, your body, because your brain is like a pharmacy, it releases chemicals, growth factors, hormones to create a negative environment. And of course, the opposite, the positive environment as well. And this is a very, very important understanding for any caregiver or stroke survivor, if they can kind of come to terms with it. Because if your beliefs, based on your beliefs, we create our thoughts, isn't that right? And if our
Yes.
thoughts are negative, then we're going to be in a kind of negative state, and we're going to make negative decisions. And of course, negative decisions means we're not going to take the actions we need, and probably won't get the results we want. So
Yes.
I think that's the cycle of things, So I love talking to people like you, because over the course of writing, before I wrote this book, I probably had read about 130 of these popular psychology books. And
Hmm.
somebody started me off one day with Malcolm Gladwell, first of all. Malcolm
Tipping point.
Gladwell's
Sure.
books.
Hmm.
Yes. And Outliers was the one that I had
Outliers.
started
Okay.
with. And of course, this 10,000 hour rule principle, where if you want to be an expert in any area of
Mhm.
life, did you ever hear of that?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've
And
actually met Malcolm a couple times. So yeah, it's
Oh, and I'd love
absolutely.
to meet him sometime,
Mhm.
because I'd
Sure.
love to thank him, because
Yeah.
he was like the start of me. Because
Yep.
I think that same principle, and a lot of the stroke associations nowadays are recommending that people do repetitive exercises. So, instead of 10,000 hours, I often say to people the mantra is 10,000 repetitions. So
Yes.
if you can get people to do 10,000 repetitions, you're going to give themselves a very good chance. But of
Yeah.
course, the secret is, how do you motivate people to do those things?
Sure.
Isn't that right? And of course, one very good thing to motivate people is to be able to prove to them that they're making progress.
Absolutely.
So we discussed this in the book as well. And I was saying to you earlier that we've two children in our house, James and Ellen. And of course, when we don't see them getting tall in front of us, isn't that right?
Right. Right.
Because it happens so slowly. It's only
Sure.
when we put them up against the wall. And
Right.
I don't know, in your house, do you have one of those little marks on the
I
wall where the
did.
kid?
I did. My girl's 30 years old, so it's like yeah,
Yeah,
but we
yeah,
still
yeah.
have it. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, Granny and Grandad come in if I haven't seen them for a few months, and they say, "Oh my God, James and
You
Ellen got so
sprouted up.
tall."
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're saying, "Did they?" And you see, the same thing happens with stroke people. If you can only move your arm a small little bit, or your fingers a little bit, and you can move it a small bit more the next day, it's very hard sometimes to see that. But if you can prove it to them, and you can do this very simply with simple measurements, if you
Sure.
can prove it to them, there's nothing nicer, there's nothing
Right.
greater as far as motivation. And then the second thing, which is awful key here, Scott, and I'm sorry about this, but I'm going to tell you one more small story. All
You're
right.
good. Sure.
There's a, and actually here, do you see this in front of you? This is the
Hmm.
key to the second story. It's like a set of Lego. Do you ever
Okay.
play with Lego, Scott?
Yeah. I did
Yeah,
when I was a kid. Absolutely.
yes. And anyway, there's another brilliant psychologist in Duke University, and he's called Dan Ariely. Now, I don't know. I bet you're going to
Hmm.
tell me you met him as well, because
No,
you.
no, don't know.
Anyway, Dan is this psychologist, and he did this brilliant experiment with Lego and little Lego sets. And what he was trying to do with people, Scott, was he was giving you, let's say he gave you this Lego set now, and he said to you, right, Scott, this might take you 10 or 15 minutes to make. I'm going to pay you $10 to make that. Okay.
Mhm.
And when you've it done, I'm going to give you another set, and this time I'm going to pay you $9.50. And when you've that one done, I'll pay you the next one $9.0850. And everyone
Mhm.
you do, you're going to get paid less. And he wanted to see how long would people keep making those sets before they felt it wasn't worth their while, which is a good
Mm.
question to ask.
Yeah.
But like all these experiments, there was a great twist to it. So when you brought your Lego setup completed at the start to Dan. He looked at it. He recorded that you had it done. He recognized, said, "Well done, Scott. This is fantastic." He praised you. He encouraged you. He said, "Well, my God, Scott, you could do loads more of these." And he acknowledged everything you'd done. And then, more importantly, he took it and he put it on a shelf up behind him so that when you were doing your next one, you could see that one. And as you were doing
Mm.
the third one, you could see the first two. And then people in the other group, when they brought their Lego set up to him, he looked at it and then nothing.
Mm.
Absolutely nothing. There was no recognition. There was no recording of it. There was no body language saying that it was good. There was no encouragement. There was no acknowledgement. In fact, this time what he did was he broke it up in front of you and he put it in the Lego bin under the table. No, he gave you the set and he paid you the same and as he did the other side.
Sure.
And so, of course, what you can imagine what happened. The group that got the recognition, the praise, the encouragement, the acknowledgement, they
Mhm.
went almost twice as long.
Sure.
And you see, that that lesson holds true for every facet of life. And
Yes.
stroke rehabilitation is the same. So if you're minding somebody who's a stroke and they're doing stuff and you record it for them and you say, look, at last week you did 10 exercises, this week you're doing 15. So you're
Sure.
improving, right? When you're doing it, you're encouraging them and you're acknowledging, you're saying, look, I know this is really hard. I know this is tough. And you're praising them for the effort as opposed to not doing that. Then people work harder and they kind of motivate themselves. And you see, every business leader and every boss should listen to that experiment because
Oh, absolutely.
a wee
Yeah.
pat on the back, everybody is doesn't do any harm, I think.
I mean, I'm a huge believer in inch by inch, it's a cinch. By the art, it's hard, right? If you make those little increment adjustments that lead to progress and they can be shown by a caregiver in your case, or say someone in a batting cage with a professional athlete I work with, or a golf
Yeah.
swing, but also they celebrate those wins, or I call them stacking the dubs, stacking the W's, stacking the W's, stacking the W's, and it wins because I'm seeing a lot of like when I first work with clients, the first thing you have to do every day, Monday to Friday, is give me three things they're grateful for. Like, why do I have to do that? I'm a millionaire. I'm this, I'm that. Then write that down. Okay.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then the next week, I add on their intentions for the day. And then there's an 8 week progress that I add these things on. There's a reason for it. People, and I'm like, listen, it stimulates the reticular activating system. Okay. So if you said, hey, Scott, I have a Tesla. And I say, well, what's that, Dr. Ken? And you say, well, come over. I go look at it. I'm like, oh man, that's a nice Tesla, dude. That's cool. I see your emotion attached to it. I see my emotion attached to it. By the time I drive home, how many Teslas you think I'm going to see? Probably 12, 15 Teslas, especially here in South Florida. So
Yeah.
again, it's a reaffirmation every single day, Monday to Friday. And I treat it like a workout. We're going to work out 5 days a week. And you're going to take Saturday and Sunday off. But we're going to get back to it and get back to it. And it's the consistency. But I also celebrate every one of their dubs with them.
Yeah.
And then they start seeing it. They'll get back on track of hitting the ball straight or getting back. My wrestlers, they taking the guy down. Their mindset is there. And I can see how you're implementing that into stroke straight survivors. I don't want to call them victims, but the stroke survivor and getting back. So that's just amazing that you're adding the belief system into the recovery as well. That's awesome.
It's vital because
Yeah.
you can do all the therapy in the world. I can explain to you if you've had a stroke. I can say to you, look, this is an unbelievable therapy. That's an unbelievable therapy, and you can do it. But if you're subconscious, and of course beliefs are subconscious, isn't that right? They only really show
100%,
themselves.
baby. Yeah.
They only show themselves when you're making your choices and your decisions. I'm always saying to people, it's a bit like Titanic, the movie. That captain in the ship, he only saw that small bit of ice above the
Yeah.
surface. He didn't realize that there was a big humdinger underneath.
Yeah.
And you see, and again, like what you said there about the Teslas, I mean, that's a very good example. When people buy a new car or they buy a second-hand car, and of course they go out the garage, and if it was a blue Toyota, for example, immediately their brain sees all the blue Toyotas that are coming towards them. Isn't that right? Because
Right.
they've been primed. Whereas all those blue Toyotas were there last week, but
Whole
we never.
time.
Yes, and
Exactly.
beliefs are exactly the same.
It's
They're under the
exactly.
surface, and we. But you see, the problem. Look at the question is, how do you change people's beliefs? And I mean, you probably have solutions for this,
Yeah.
but in stroke world, I suppose what I'm thinking is we have to get our caregivers or our medical professions mentioning what's called belief based statements. I suppose these are kind of like
Absolutely.
generic kind of positive
Sure.
statements,
Yeah.
not overwhelming people with too much detail and content, but all the time getting the message out to them saying, look, I heard there yesterday that neuroplasticity goes on forever. And
Mhm.
I've heard that your brain is capable of repairing itself anytime after a stroke.
Sure.
I heard that my home is a brilliant place to do rehabilitation. And this is kind of passively getting these messages in. So it kind of dilutes the messages that are there already
Right.
in somebody's head. And that's probably the best thing you can do. And you see, as a caregiver, you're well capable of saying these things.
$100%.
You can do that.
Affirmations, getting them there. And I'm not a huge believer, I'm a huge believer in affirmations, but I flip the script with my clients as well, meaning our brains, which you would forgot more about this than I'll ever know, but they are programmed to problem solve. That's how
Yeah.
we are, right? So I have them flip their affirmation into a powerful question. Say, how is it that I'm healing so fast? How is it that I get to do these exercises every day to improve my well-being? How is it that I don't live with shame, guilt, or conflict? I have different people that will have different affirmations they put out, but I flip it on them. So we're going to ask you as a question, and we're going
Yeah.
to ask it with conviction. So that subconscious mind that you just mentioned starts going to work on it, right?
Yeah.
You know, and
And another very simple way for you to explain to people as well is that, and I say this at talks, I say, look at the person beside you, right? And I want you to imagine that when you leave this room, and if there was an interviewer, a radio host outside, and they interviewed both of you, do you think both of you would tell him the same story that you'd heard from me? And of course, the answer is no,
yeah,
because of your beliefs, your brain actually deletes information that doesn't fit with your
100%,
beliefs. Isn't that correct? And
100%.
in psychology, they call this confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
We like to find people who have the same beliefs as ourselves, and we seek them out, and we only listen to the stuff that agrees
Mm-hmm.
with what.
Right.
Isn't that right? And of course, everybody just needs to be aware that this happens. You see, and the other issue that we have in stroke world, which is a bit of a dangerous thing, and I don't know if you see this in the world of professional sports as well, is that when we go on the internet, we see these survivors who have made a miraculous recovery because they're the people that are highlighted on the screens. And usually they're promoting some therapy that they feel made this miraculous recovery.
Right.
And of course, this is what they call survivorship bias in psychology as well.
Yep.
And what people have to realize is behind that one person who's made this miraculous recovery in a very short space of time, there's another 1,000 stroke patients who actually have made a very slow, small recovery over a long period of time. And that's actually the norm. But if you're looking at this on the internet and your recovery is slow and it's taking a long time and you compare yourself, you can actually depress yourself because you'll be saying, oh, my recovery is very poor.
Yeah.
And you have to realize not to do that. It's a bit like Facebook, isn't that right as well? So when I see some of my friends on Facebook, because nobody really puts up on Facebook that your kids are trashing the house and making a mess of the place, and nobody puts up on
Yeah.
Facebook that my kids haven't spoken to me for 3 years.
Yeah.
We put up when we're on holidays and there's the
Sure.
sunshine and there's the tequilas and there's everything. And of
Yeah.
course, if you're sitting looking at Facebook and you're looking out my window here and it's raining, or I can't even see out the window because my neighbor hasn't cut the hedge for about 10 years. And I'm comparing to this, I'm thinking my life isn't so good.
Yeah. But comparison's a thief of joy. Bottom line, there's enough said on
Absolutely.
that. So, Doc, I got to ask you something. So, have you seen the movie Back to the Future?
Yes.
Let's get in that
Yes.
DeLorean with Marty McFly. I can't believe next year it's going to be 40 years old, right? But let's get in that
Right.
DeLorean with Marty McFly. Let's go back to the double deuce, the 22-year-old Ken. Okay. What kind of knowledge nuggets, what we call them here at Time to Shine today, what kind of knowledge nuggets might you drop on the younger Ken, right? not to change anything because your journey's been pretty awesome, okay? But to maybe help them shorten the learning curve or blast through maybe just a little bit quicker.
Well, I mean, look at if I want to be very honest with you,
Stay away from the
when
doctor stuff. I wanted to hear about Ken.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, when I was younger, I probably drank too much.
Okay.
And I kind of something I realized as I got older that drink doesn't suit me.
Okay.
I act stupid when I drink. I any of the decisions, the poor decisions I've made in my life, or embarrassed myself and things like that. That all happened around those years when I was in college and when I was
Sure.
drinking. And I don't drink now. And I actually, if I went back to that age, I probably wish I had had the confidence in those days to actually not do that because I suppose everybody at that age there's a social pressure on them to try and follow everybody, all your friends and things like that.
Yeah.
And I suppose over the last 20 years since I really stopped drinking, and I probably have been the most productive in terms of I get up early in the morning and I get work done. I don't end up with hangovers and I don't waste a lot of my life
That's awesome.
on those things. And I have to say, so
Productivity. Yeah.
that's probably I wish I had the confidence back then
Okay.
to know what I know now.
I
Yeah,
appreciate that
definitely.
transparency, man. How about
Yeah.
how do you want your dash remembered? That little line in between your incarnation date and your expiration date, your life date and death date. Every tombstone has that dash. How does how does Dr. Ken want that dash remembered?
Well, look at I want my wife is a great expression here. She's saying, look, people won't remember you for what you're worth, or they won't remember you for what you've done, but they'll remember you for how you made them feel. And I love that expression. And I would hope that people remember me for being a very genuine, trustworthy, kind of honest guy, that
Absolutely.
somebody that I like helping people, and I think that's probably where it's been very exciting over the last year since the book came out, and because of Amazon and because everybody worldwide can get their hands on this,
Sure.
the amount of people that have been coming back to me and saying that they've really benefited from this. That's a tremendous
That's
feeling
amazing.
when you can help people like that. But look, I try and balance life. We've nearly 18-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter, and they're at a stage in their life when you like to spend time with them and be around. And it's very hard. I mean, to get to where you are, Scott, where you have all the things going on, you probably work an awful lot of hours, and you're probably away from home a lot. So people have to make sacrifices, and I suppose I'm trying to just balance those things to try and be around as much as possible or be present, but still try and get this message out there to as many stroke
That's amazing.
survivors and people as possible. I think that's probably what I want to do. But I suppose the big word in life is contentment, isn't it? I wouldn't even say happiness. I'd say if you can try and be content in your life, it's that overall feeling. And I'm at that stage where we are at the moment. I'm very lucky with everybody around me. I'm very lucky with the colleagues I work with, and I'm very content. So
True love.
I think
Yeah.
that's kind of a stage where you can actually enjoy things, and it's nice.
Nice. I love that. Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. We are back. And Dr. Ken, I'm going to make it a point that we meet up in the flesh one day, at least one time here. Okay.
Oh, I'd
But,
love to.
and we'll talk about some of these questions for probably half hour at a time, because I could probably pick your brain and vice versa on a lot of things here. But today you have 5 seconds with no explanations. And I promise they can all be answered that way. You ready to level up?
Let's go.
All right. Doc, what's the best leveling up advice you've ever received?
To realize when drink doesn't suit you.
Love it. Share one of your personal habits that contributes to your success.
Getting up early in the morning.
Early riser. Love it. So you see me walking down the street or at an event or somewhere, and I look like I'm in my doldrums a little bit. Outside of your book, what book might you hand me to help me level up my mindset?
Well, I mean, I love Malcolm Gladwell's
Okay.
Outliers or any of Malcolm's
Outliers.
books.
Beautiful. Your most commonly used emoji, if any, when you text.
Oh, a smiley one of some sort.
Awesome. Nicknames growing up?
Monty.
Monty.
Mo
Oh, I love that,
Monty.
brother.
Monty Monaghan.
Love it. Have any hidden talent and or superpowers that you have that nobody knows about until now?
I play the guitar. I play with a folk group in my local church.
Love it.
Kids folk group.
Awesome. Chess, checkers, or Monopoly?
Chess, I think.
Love it. Headline for your life.
Mm, contentment,
I love it,
honesty.
dude. That's awesome. Go-to ice cream flavor.
Oh, cookies and cream, I think.
Awesome. There's a sandwich called the Irish Monte. Build that sandwich for me. What's on it?
Oh, it's like whatever you'd have at Christmas time. There's ham and there's kind of turkey and there's cranberry and there's
Ooh,
stuffing
very
and
nice.
there's lettuce and all that. Whatever, kind of a Christmas theme to it, I think.
All right. So what song was playing by Joe Dolan when you met your wife that really stands out to you? Was it "It's You, It's You, It's You," or "I'll Give You All My Love to You"? What song was it, brother?
Oh my God, he played it the whole night. He had about 10, he played whatever songs.
Which one comes out of him that really reminds me of the first time, reminds you of the first time you met your wife?
Oh God, now that is difficult because I can't even remember the songs that he
Okay,
played. I
no
just
problem.
remember him.
I
I
just want to
remember
throw a
him.
little hiccup in there.
Yeah,
Got
yeah, yeah.
any favorite charity and or organization you'd like to give your time and or money to?
Well, I mean, look at I'm part of the Neurology Support Centre,
Love
which
it.
is a charity in Northwest Ireland.
Okay. I love it. And last question, you can elaborate on this one a little bit, but what's the best decade of music? 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s?
Oh, I love the 80s, I have to say.
Okay.
And I
Can I
mean,
ask
look
your
at
age? Are you in your 40s or 50s?
I'm 54,
54?
Scott.
Okay, I'm 52.
Yeah,
So we're in the same
yeah.
Generation X genre, and the 80s were awesome.
Actually, I look. Do you ever look back on the old videos of Live Aid? And yeah, do you remember when
Yes.
Queen? Remember when Freddie Mercury did that fantastic
Oh my
performance at Live
gosh.
Aid?
Oh
Isn't that
yes.
cool? Yeah,
Dude. I mean
that's for me.
the 80s was it because there was an invasion into the United States. There's an invasion from everywhere. UT and U2 invaded us with their
Yeah.
music. Duran came at us. All the plus you had the kind of the rap kind of starting with Beastie Boys or Run DMC, and then you had the big hair, don't care. It just had all of it in the 80s, dude. And
Well,
that is just amazing.
we started only about 2 months ago. We started playing that "We Are the World," the
Yeah,
USA for Africa. We sing that now in with our kids in the
that's
folk group,
cool.
and we absolutely love it. And of course, the video you go watching it, all the Lionel Richies and
Legends,
everybody.
dude.
Yeah, yeah,
Legends.
yeah.
There's actually on Netflix, it was The Greatest Night in Music, I think's the name of it. It's a documentary about that song
Oh, very
and
good.
how
Okay.
it, dude, go watch it
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you're going to
yeah.
see like people, because it was all held super top secret at a place after the Grammys because they wanted to do
Yes.
it that night because everyone was going to be at the Grammys. And dude, guys were hammered. Like Kenny Rogers, hammered. Say, dude, it's awesome. Like, watch the doc. It's awesome. But,
Yeah.
Doc, tell me about the Light Mirrors action book. Like, because I can't wait to dig into it. I'm going to buy it on Kindle today. I want a signed copy from you sent my way at some point in our relationship, whether you bring it
I
with you
definitely will.
next time in the States. But I am going to do a 2 book giveaway here at the end. But tell us a little bit about the book, please.
Well, I would say that probably 2/3 of it is very much what we discussed earlier on, the kind of theory, the kind of psychology behind what's making a person kind of have the confidence to kind of realize that you can run a fantastic program in your own home, you can recover anytime after a stroke. And then it also kind of gives you a little bit of guidance in terms of a starting off program that you could choose to do. One of the things that I try to do as well, which I probably people aren't aware of it, at the end of every chapter, just a very simple thing. There's a bar, there's a little scanner code. I don't know if you can
QR
see
code
it
kind of
there.
thing?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
QR code that's in
Yep.
there. Can
Love
you
it.
see that? Anyway, it's like a brain. Anyway, what I've done is I have summarized all of the main concepts of every chapter through videos and things, and they're linked on those QR codes. So if a patient can't read, well, they can listen to the videos.
Yes.
And
I'm doing the
yeah,
same thing with my book.
it actually works very well. And you see, if you use the dynamic QR codes, then you can change the content a little bit. You're not
Yes.
kept, which is very
Right.
helpful. But look at, as I said to you, I had heard for probably about 30 years, the last 20 years, I talked to stroke survivors and people, and they had said to me, look at when they go home, they don't have the guidance, they don't know what to do. They want to do everything for the person. They
Mhm.
don't want to have this regret that they didn't do everything for them, but they don't know what to do and they're afraid they'll do harm. And so when I heard that, that was the nub of that
Love.
there's a need for a text like this. And
Sure.
when I was writing it, Scott, I was actually working with three stroke survivors and their families,
Okay.
and I used to give them the draft of each chapter, and I'd talk
That's
to them
awesome, dude.
afterwards, and I got great feedback. Actually, one thing that really, I mean, it was almost emotional, even though so the book is called Lights, Mirrors, Action. It's a little bit of a play on lights, cameras, action,
Yeah.
but I do mention
With
about
the
11
mirroring that you talked about earlier, it makes sense on it. Yeah.
yeah, but I do mention about 11 or 12 different movies in there and quotes because there's concepts from movies that.
Sure.
You're familiar with The Wizard of Oz, and there's a
Sure.
great there's a great quote from the good witch Glenda, something to do with that you've always had the power. The power has always been inside you, but you just didn't have the confidence to believe it, right?
Yeah.
And I remember this chapter, I gave it to the stroke people. And when I went to one young girl who had a stroke, she was only in her late 30s. When I went up to her house and in her room, she had bought the stencil of the quote, and it was up on her wall because she had felt it was like such a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And that was the moment when you kind of realized that you can really influence people, and you're sitting here at this desk, same desk, you can write stuff that can make a difference to people's lives.
It's
And that's a fantastic feeling. And you should write your book as well. I think you should get the main messages out there, because
100%. Yeah.
it is actually a very enjoyable process. It's like everything. It
Yeah.
takes a while, but you actually learn an awful lot. And that's what's happening now, even from talking to you as well, Scott. The things that you pick out of the book, I might never have thought that that would be
Right.
significant.
Right. I
Because
do
I
love that you wrote caregivers. I know it's just a play on words. It's not even a play on words. Just the way you stroked it was caregivers and stroke survivors. So like
yes,
right there, it wasn't stroke survivors and their caregivers. It was like you nailed it with that, because it's like in my brain, I'm going, okay, dude, if loved one had a stroke. You know what I'm saying? It's like this book is written for me. I'm
yes.
saying it's like it's almost like a doctor, a legit doctor wrote a book for me. You know what I'm saying? And I think that I know it's still a play on words or whatever you want to call it, but I think you nailed it with that. What
And
I'm
you see,
saying?
and purposely, and people should never fear this. It's written in a very, very easy to understand way, because I was expecting it was going to be read by mostly non-medical people, but there's 140 footnotes of
Right.
science there behind it if you want to investigate it.
Right.
But even my wife would say to you that, and I was a wee bit afraid in one way to give it to her and show it to her, and I'd say she probably was thinking she wouldn't maybe understand it. But actually, just towards the end, when we were running out of time, and I really needed to get somebody to proofread it a little bit, she said, "Look,
Sure.
I'll read it tonight when you're at work." And she went through 14 chapters in the night, and honestly, she actually got a surprise. It was easy to understand. It's in very simple to understand terms, with lots of those stories that we talked about
Yeah.
earlier. And yeah, look, at the feedback so far has been
It's
fantastic, and
fantastic.
you're
Yeah.
fantastic for bringing me on and giving me a
Yeah.
chance to talk about it, because it's very enjoyable yourself.
Yeah. And as we wrap this up, and it's my pleasure, 100%, Doc, but as we wrap this up quickly, please leave us with one last knowledge nugget that we can take with us, internalize, and take action on.
So, well, what we're going to do is, if a doctor gives you a medicine or I give you a new therapy, I'm going to also make you look at a video that explains to you why it's going to work, and so that you understand how it's going to work before you actually do it. I'm going to make you do that so that you're going to get 10 times the benefit from it. And that's going to become wholesale in medicine over the next 20 years. We'll
Love
have to
that.
have a bet.
I love that. And Squat, I'm going to do actually, I'm going to do a 3-book giveaway on this for the first 3 people that puts, whether it's in Pinterest, whether it's in LinkedIn, wherever you put this, you can text it to 561-440-3830. But the we're gonna whoever puts in the Irish Monty into anything social, I'm gonna get a book mailed out to you on time to shine today's dime. And I just have to tell you, Squad, as I kind of summarize this, I've learned so much about strokes that I had never learned before, about neuroplasticity. I mean, this guy had kind of 2 careers, worked into sports, and then he kind of parlayed that knowledge into really leveling up into the people's brain. His mirror therapy that he talks about with creating new pathways is just off the charts. He wants to remember that home is a fantastic place to carry out rehabilitation, and that your caregiver, whoever is there, their beliefs are very, very critical in this, to be able to stack those dubs or to be able to really celebrate those wins that you have. Inch by inch, it's a cinch. If it's a little twitch of the finger, that's a win. Stack it. Let them know it. I mean, my guy here, Dr. Ken, is planting trees he's probably never going to sit in the shade of. And one other thing I noticed is he does stuff for the intention, not so much the attention. He really leans in and wants to help the stroke survivors and their caregivers. He's really about contentment, and the way that he explained things in layman's terms for me to understand, it was fantastic. And the way his book is written, which I did cheat a little bit and go into the Kindle version and kind of read into it in the free sample, that's what I got. And all I can say is this guy levels up his health. He levels up his wealth. He's a handsome devil. He's earned his varsity squad letter here at Time to Shine today. Doc, thank you so much for coming on. We absolutely love your guts here, brother.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been actually a fantastic chat. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and we are going to have to meet at some stage.
We
And I really
will.
appreciate you when you come to Ireland. You have to let me know. Is that all right?
You bet. 100%. We'll chat soon, my
I
friend.
hope. Oh, brilliant! Thank you very, very much.
Bye now. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Time to Shine Today, proudly brought to you by Inlet Properties and Investments. If you are a business owner or professional who would like to be interviewed on the Time to Shine Today podcast, please visit timetoshinetoday.com/guest. If you'd like this episode, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. There's a link in the show notes to our website. Also, there you will see our recommended resources. We hope you will help support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have been listening to, it'd be great if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe while you're at it. I'm your host, Scott Ferguson, and until next time, let's level up. It's your time to shine.